So, hello everyone again, Jason Senimore, SINC USA. Thanks very much for joining us for this presentation and open discussion. I am delighted to have the next speaker lined up for you, Mr. Jeff Roberts from Innovation Vista. Jeff is going to be leading this session around successfully navigating change management. As we know, change management can be very, very tricky in all parts of the organization, from the very top all the way down to the very bottom. So without further ado, enough talking from me. I will hand over to Jeff and let you take it away, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and hopefully we can discuss some things about change management that they're interesting, not the same thing that you would get from Googling the topic, hopefully, and a little deeper insights maybe from my experience and what I have seen. And I'm very much looking forward to the Q&A section at the end as well to hear what's on your minds. So a little bit about me to begin. I am a former 5-time CIO. As you can imagine, I have quite a bit of change management experience through those tenures. I have the scars to prove it, and certainly feel that one of the reasons I might be qualified to speak on this topic is I've made all of the mistakes that I'm going to speak about myself personally, and have seen them made in projects I've been a part of. So the risks and the impact of these are real, and I think change management is very much worthy of time and attention from IT and security leaders. I've had experience with digital transformation, system replacements, new implementations, putting in systems where there was really nothing other than manual process before, M&A integrations, where we try to unify on a single platform, and also where we try to run separate platforms and then integrate the results after the fact. Seen several flavors of that, and certainly been a part of security program rollouts as well. I am the founder of Innovation Vista. After those CIO tenures, I opened up a consulting practice to help companies, particularly mid-sized companies, use technology to impact their top line and business results. For part-time IT leadership, IT assessments, and strategy consulting, as well as consulting on individual projects. So a little bit of our agenda. So we're certainly going to talk about why change is hard, the reason this is a topic, and the reason that there is a considerable practice around this space. I think it's fair to say it is harder during a pandemic. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of why, and maybe some things we can do to try to work around those challenges. Give you some helpful concepts. I'm not here to present a change management framework, any kind of formal program. I really want to look behind the driving ideas in those models and frameworks to what I think is the real challenge around change management, which is human nature and corporate culture. So that will be a huge focus of mine. I am going to give some ways to mitigate change. Before we talk about managing it, I think there's ways we can size change in a way that's helpful. I think make it more palatable, possibly. And then certainly once we've done what we can in that front, we need to discuss actually managing the change and what goes into the rollout of a change process or a transformation. So why change is so hard? I want to begin, before we jump into what I think, I would love to get a sense of the audience. Jason, if it's possible, if we could kick off the poll here. I'm interested to know, for all of you, through your career, what percentage of change projects do you believe have fully succeeded? So take a look at that. It should be up on your screen now, and we'll give everyone a minute or so to respond and see what has been said.
Yep, response is coming in. Another few seconds. Fantastic. That looks like the majority of people have contributed there.
Yeah. Very interesting. All right, so I think we're good maybe on seeing that. So interestingly, we have a nice bell curve in the audience here that surrounds about 50%, 41 to 60% of change projects have been successful. That, ladies and gentlemen, is better than the average. So McKinsey in their research has looked into this question, and they believe that about 30% of change projects fully succeed. Some of that difference might be around how do you define fully. There's certainly a level of success where some benefit is received, but the project maybe didn't do everything that was promised initially, things like that. But anyway you slice it, whether it's 30% or 50%, it is a shockingly low number. Shockingly low. So sorry, I jumped there. So it's hard, and there are, for that reason, lots of models, frameworks that are out there. The industry really has not stumbled upon a silver bullet. It's not as if 10 years ago you would have worse results on that survey, and we've gotten a lot better. I think that part of the reasons for that is that there are just so many more variables into what makes a change project successful or not than what the project team does. And again, a lot of it is going to surround human nature and the corporate culture of the place where the change is being attempted. So if you research why change projects fail, that's a worthy thing to do when you're embarking on a new project. You see, frankly, a lot of reasons out there. There's not enough urgency created for the project. There's not enough leadership support. That's a common theme. There are not enough resources focused on the change. There's too much relying on people who have a day job. That's a common problem. There's too much change implemented too fast. That's one that I'm going to touch on in the mitigation section as well. There's a lack of adoption outside the core team. So you see this pattern a lot. The project team gets excited, senior leadership maybe even gets excited, but the groups that are supposed to be adopting the new technology or process or transforming the business model, they don't buy in. And as a result, you can imagine momentum fails pretty quickly. So again, I think so much falls on human nature. Why is this? Well, we all know, I think, in our own lives, we dislike change. We dislike most change. There's some changes maybe that are exciting. The vast majority are they're troubling because there is, first of all, a fear of the unknown. When something's different in a corporate setting, you know, someone is good at their job. They're very comfortable in their role. They know what's expected. They hear about some change program where a new system or process is going to be implemented. They're immediately fearful. They don't know what that is. They don't know if they're going to be as good. They know that, let's be honest, some change initiatives transition people out of the company. And so their mind immediately goes to those worries, and it will stay there in the worst case scenario and potentially the rumor mill until all of their concerns are addressed. They can sometimes have a fear of loss of importance. So if they've got a role where they're respected and needed in the organization, maybe they're the expert on a particular process, and a new system initiative comes around, which is attempting to maybe automate that process, their very natural worry is, I'm all of a sudden going to be less important around here than what I have been. So very deep human nature concerns. Predictability and stability in knowing what their days and weeks and months are going to be like. There's a certain comfort level in that lets people live life and maybe focus a lot of their mental energy on their life and not have to be consistently worried and adapting in their workplace. And when change is coming, that stops, and they do need to spend a lot of mental energy thinking about what's going on at work, what's going to be new, what am I going to need to adjust to, what's going to be expected of me that's different. So no small factor here, fear, not something to be underestimated. You know, I think, speaking of the COVID and pandemic that we're in the middle of here, I think it makes it worse. I do think that more people being remote and connected via video conferencing, I think, you know, it certainly makes people more isolated. And I think some of the support system that might be there in a team environment in normal times is weakened as a result of that. And I think it's a little harder over a video conference or a phone call to express the kind of support and, you know, we'll get through this, don't worry. Those kinds of things I think are harder. So as a result, change is harder during the pandemic. And, you know, on top of that, outside of the emotional side, you've got just the busyness of work. A lot of groups have their own initiatives. They have their own improvements they're trying to implement for the year. And then here comes one that's put on them from IT and from corporate that is just, you know, sometimes a straw that feels like it's going to break the camel's back. So I think human nature, again, huge aspect of this. Corporate culture is the other side I wanted to briefly touch on. You know, one size does not fit all. If you think about the difference in a change initiative at a company that has failed the last 3 or 4 changes they've attempted versus one that has succeeded at reinventing themselves multiple times, you can imagine the type of difference that's going to pop up just from people's natural reaction in that culture. I think there's some business model differences. So if you're attempting, for example, a cost savings project in a low margin, high volume business that is in a stable industry, it's probably perceived pretty well. It's probably seen as this is a way we can grow our top line, and maybe the most likely way we can grow. On the other hand, in a business that is high margin, an emerging industry that's high growth, a cost-saving project may be sniffed at, honestly. And you know, cliches get thrown around all the time, but in the first kind of culture, you might hear a penny saved is a penny earned, and people feel good about that. In the second sort of culture, same exact project, they're gonna feel very different. You know, every day we're not growing, our competitors are growing, and you can't save your way to growth, right? And all of those are cliches in the business world for a reason, and they have tremendous amounts of validity. Just depending on the culture, you're going to see one more than the other. So for all those reasons, I do not have a recipe book to give you. I don't believe there is one. I do think we can help these success rates of our change projects by being more cognizant of these human nature and corporate culture aspects. So let me give you just some principles. I think there are a lot that are thrown out there. I believe in planning and designing everything from the perspective of the impacted staff. And that sounds very obvious and easy to do. It really is not. And I think it takes a discipline for senior leaders who are outside of that world all day, every day, and for technology leaders who are in a different world all day, every day, to really stop and think about, all right, the front line, the middle management, marketing, sales, operations, supply chain, delivery chain. What is their day like, and what is this project going to do to them? There's a huge focus on communication for good reason in change management. Completely believe it, and I think it's often maybe even not enough, or it's the wrong flavor. So I think when you communicate a change project like that, you want to give the wider strategic reason. Don't just say there's a new ERP coming, it will be great. There's a new widget system coming, and it's the best widget system we've ever had. That really doesn't help people understand that as leadership, you acknowledge that this is a change, that it will be hard, and that you're doing it for good reason. That even though it's hard, it's worth it, and here's why. And I think without that, sometimes corporate communications come across kind of like a parent saying to a child, because I said so, we're going to do this new system. And it's better, and it'll be great. And it's sort of a trust me sort of thing that I think if you pull the curtain back and just tell them more, and even tell them some of the costs and some of the challenges, but describe that future end state and get them excited about it. Don't underestimate the power of story in exciting people and making them willing to go through a journey. Another principle I think that's helpful is that evolutionary change is easier than revolutionary change. Whether you want to use the analogy of the boiled frog or just that incremental, agile kind of approach that a lot of us are familiar with in the technology world, the result of it is that each individual change is smaller, it's easier to understand, it's easier to succeed and adapt to. That's another principle that I think helps. And then the last one I want to share is about this idea of commitment from leadership. I see and have made a lot of mistakes personally in this vein. I think technology people, we sometimes see the vision, we understand where we're going, and we get so excited about the potential and what's there that we oversell this to leadership. I think you absolutely need their support, but I would counsel getting their support without putting rose-colored glasses on the leadership team. And what I mean is, don't say how great it will be and, this is fantastic, look how much more efficient, look at this capability, we don't have it, we will in the future, it's great. Those things all may be true, but you need to couple that with, look, it's a hard journey. We're making some assumptions that are probably going to prove wrong. There are going to be some potholes in the road. There are going to be some speed bumps in the road. You are going to have people in your groups come to you and say, this is stupid. This isn't going to work. We're too busy. I can't support this. Warn them, warn leadership that that's coming, and ask for their support in that vein. And ask them to commit. It's really more than support. It's a commitment that you need, that they will actually step up and say, all right, when we hit those speed bumps, I will help set the tone with my team to keep going. Let's get over the speed bump. Let's go. Because remember, that final destination, it's worth it. And that's the level of buy-in you need from leadership that really is helpful. If you do the rose-colored glasses and you get them to believe that destination and you don't share how rough the journey may be, you run the risk that they pull their support when you hit that first speed bump. And they say, no one told me this was going to happen. I mean, you're killing the operation here. We're going to lose money. We're going to be late on this and that. Those kind of things are real risks. And having their eyes open and a joint commitment, I think, is key, frankly, prerequisite to succeeding. So that's a few principles that hopefully help. I want to dive in a little bit on this idea of mitigating change. So Love this visual. So, it can feel sometimes like we're eating an entire elephant. I don't know if anyone else is losing their appetite looking at this thing, or if it's just me, but there's a lot of wisdom in this concept. And I think that it is a lot like applying an agile thought process to organizational impact. So I guess the first idea is, can we perforate? Can we break apart the functional changes into phases like this elephant has been perforated? It's not always possible, but I think if it is, it's well worth exploring. You can do, for example, geographies in a rollout. You can touch one at a time rather than worldwide roll. You can break up change across functions. So move a particular group or job role to a new process or platform first, get them stable, and then move on to the next one. And for sure, there are trade-offs in taking that kind of approach. It means that you're not throwing the big red switch, which means you're operating for a time as an organization on two different platforms or systems or processes. And that can be hard. It can require a bridge so that you can still tie everything together. There's a cost involved, obviously, in building that bridge. But in my experience, it's almost always worth it. And what you get in exchange for those kinds of perforations and breaking apart the change is lower risk. You buy yourself this opportunity to learn from the first steps that you make, to get better at it for the future steps. You buy yourself the opportunity for quick wins. Quick win it's a cliche, but really, why is it important? It's a story. Again, it's this human nature side of it. If Group A hears that Group B went through the same rollout and it went well, and they feel like they're more efficient now, and they had a great deal of training and support from the team, and they really held their hand as they went through it, they're so much more comfortable. They go into it optimistic, maybe even excited. So you buy yourself that if you can evolve these changes and what I call perforate them in whatever way is possible. I do want to give one word of caution on this idea. You do not want to perforate functionality changes in a way that causes multiple change steps for a particular group of people. So in other words, you don't want to launch and say, here's a new system, here's the way you do this part of your job. And then come back 2 months later and say, okay, great, here's this other thing now. And here's the way you now do this other part of your job. And then again, in a few months, if you're perforating, think about an entire group on a complex change, moving to the new, training, support, all trained and focused on that group, get them stable, then you move to the next. And that group that's already moved is done, at least for the foreseeable, with this change. They can be stable in the new world. So that's I guess my top idea for mitigating the change is this perforation. Some other things I have seen help. Keeping terminology consistent, incredibly helpful. Some systems allow you to label things and the way you load the configuration. I see the reverse sometimes for no reason, that the terminology is shifted because that was the default that came out of the box. Really think about terminology. Think about your business people and their human nature. Historical data, similar point to make on that front. It's valuable. It's sometimes easy. It's tempting to slice that off from a leadership discussion to save money and scope on a project. But it's so often referenced by customer interaction groups, people that are trying to even forecast future demand, etc. They look at that data more than I think technology and business leadership people sometimes realize. So the auditors may be fine with some separate read-only copy of the old system sitting in a corner, but really think about your people, and would it kill them or frustrate them to not have that at their fingertips? And then, the impact on analytics, frankly, could be its own talk, but you can imagine running analytics when you've not moved over data to the new platform just basically creates a split source. So a lot of complexity there. In fact, I find a lot of data warehouse projects get their initial momentum with a project like this that otherwise would create a dual source, and they want to find a way to unify. So that's a little bit on mitigating change. Let's turn now to the theme for the talk, which is managing change. There are a lot of modules. There are a lot of frameworks out there that consulting groups have put together. They've run hundreds of projects with them. They have steps like defining the change, aligning to the business, building executive support, identifying the impacted parties, communicating to those groups effectively, training them, supporting them, measuring the impact after the fact. Those kinds of protocols are very helpful. I don't want to give you any other sense. It creates a structure for a team that's going through a project to all be pulling in the same direction, to understand the work and where you are in the process as a team. I think my main point is the reason that those frameworks are effective to the extent they are is that they're trying to address these human nature and cultural impacts and risks. The reason why it's so important to identify impacted groups and communicate to them and train them and support them is that without that, you will have the rumor mill, you will have the worst case thinking, you will have this kind of challenging environment that makes the first reaction of people to this change negative and skeptical. And I'll believe it when I see it sort of thought process. So again, I think we hit on a couple of these that, communication is a good example. It's important, but why and how? And I think saying in your communication why you're doing what you're doing, get everybody on the strategic bus, so to speak, is so helpful. I mean, it's kind of trusting your people, that they'll understand and maybe be willing to share some shared pain and frustration. But if they all understand they're getting to a better place together, it's so helpful. Training is a huge focus of a lot of these frameworks. For every bit of change, I think training is huge, and I think it's one that is challenged in the time of COVID, especially. I know all of you for this talk have been 100% focused on my webinar window. You've not looked at your email, you've not looked at your report that's due at the end of the day or anything like that. I know that, but in other contexts, I think there are sometimes distractions that pop up. Webinar training for that reason is just really challenging. So, one thing that can help with that, there is an economic trade-off, but I think if you target smaller groups, it really helps with that, and also helps really ensure that what you're training people on is aimed at a relevant target for them, that they're going to believe that, all right, this is really about my job, particularly if you frame things from the business process perspective. How do you do these things that are in your job duties or that your boss may ask you to do? Is a more helpful way to train, I believe, than here's how you do this particular feature in the new system, or here's where you see this particular bit of data. And a lot of training sometimes is put together that way. Maybe for cross references, comparing the old and the new, that's helpful. But I think for really explaining a system, think about the business process. Again, human nature. Think about what they're asked to do, walk them through. And it may very well be that as you walk through their top 10 business processes, you're going to touch on a lot of the same windows and system features. You know what? That's great. If that's what happens, that means you're reinforcing those parts of the system, and they're clearly going to be important for them to know and understand. So I would suggest that the smaller the group, the better. Honestly, I've had a few projects where economically we felt it was worthwhile even to train individually. That is an extreme case. In particular, it made sense in some cases where there was no system whatsoever in place until we installed one. And so it wasn't just this system that they were learning. It was, how do you use a system at all for these kinds of functions, particularly CRM projects are the examples I'm thinking about. But a small team, they all do the same job. I think they'll pay more attention. You can make it clear to them it's tailored and much more helpful. Again, it goes hand in hand with perforating and that idea that you mitigate the change as much as possible as well. Those two ideas really play well together. Last point I want to touch on is support. I believe that the support people really benefit from going through the same training as the people they're supporting. And this is another thing that often is sliced off in the interest of cost savings. And I understand that. And I understand as technology people, we can learn systems maybe a little bit more quickly than business people. What's hard though is if we don't know what they were shown and how they were explained, the whatever new features, new capabilities, the exact terminology, and how deep did we go, and was it just high level or detailed? I think that's so helpful for support people to know, so they know where their callers and users are starting. So I would suggest take them through the exact same training that you've taken your users through. So hopefully some helpful ideas. Again, there is no recipe that I can guarantee ends with a perfect change, but I think, again, if the more that we are cognizant of human nature, the more you design and measure everything from that perspective, and the more you take the time to check and talk with people in different roles, different teams as they're impacted, the more you tailor the training and get your support people ready for different questions from different teams. There are some added costs to some of these things, but as a CIO, I always believed in looking at things from a TCO perspective. I think there's incredible cost to an organization for a failed change effort, and incredible cost even if it's painful more than it needs to be. There's a cost in training support people, for example, the exact same way that business people are. But think about the frustration that a user feels when they call into a support desk and they are told, we weren't shown that aspect of the system, or we haven't been shown this at all yet. I've seen that happen before. Our training is next week, and the launch for group number 1 has already happened. So they have no one to answer their question. I think those kinds of mistakes are far more painful and frankly far more costly than some of these ideas I've shared to try to mitigate and solve them. So hopefully with that, there's a few nuggets there that may be helpful, and if not in giving you insights, maybe at least in driving questions. So I would love, Jason, to turn it over to the floor and see if we've got questions from anyone.
Indeed, yes. Thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate that. Let's just go to here so everyone can see your face. Fantastic. So we do. The first question comes from Mr. Sean Guthrie out of Canada. What are some strategies to employ when bringing change management or organizational change management into an organization that has been resistant or traditional old school thinking change management? Is that just a 2-week training session and you're off to the races?
Yeah, it's a great question, and what I like about that question is it starts from understanding where the company is, and so the answer is somewhat embedded in that. If you know that they're against it and skeptical, if you know that that maybe they've tried some things in the past that have failed, you're going to need to bring a different approach. And really talking about that leadership buy-in really goes for the whole idea of using an organizational change management approach itself. So you need them to see, I would suggest hitting them with cold facts. How much money has been wasted in the previous efforts? How much change has not been done that maybe our competitors are ahead of us now as a result? Hit them with some really cold facts, and I touched on creating a sense of urgency. You sometimes need that. You need cold facts, painful facts. Maybe bad results are sometimes good because they can motivate a team to say, okay, look, we've blown this off before. We've not done this in a professional way, but as a result of that, look where we are. So that would be my suggestion: is a little cold water in the face with some facts, and really being purposeful about approaching them, understanding that they are skeptical, they don't believe in it. Just show them, as a result of your attitude, here's what's happened, and here's what's not happened.
Thank you. Next question comes from Rick. How can a person, IT director, for example, influence the people upstream, i.e. the C-suite, to adopt a more formal change management system? Currently, it seems to be up to the project manager to manage and the change culture and processes.
Yeah, interesting. It's a similar question to the first. I think, first of all, you want to be confident that it's needed, right? So as an IT person, I would suggest gathering information, touching base with the rest of the organization, really thinking in that enterprise mode, not the IT mode. Use their language, use their terminology. As much as you can, align what you're doing to the corporate strategies. For example, look at the CEO's shareholder letter, if there is one, or the talking points from the shareholder at the annual employee breakfast, or whatever you can get your hands on to read the CEO's thoughts. That's what he thinks is important. Begin there. And if you believe that, we don't handle change well, our change initiatives fail, or they go slowly, or they're only partially successful, sell him on the benefits to his vision and his objectives, and others in senior management, and let them know, look, this is one of the CEO's main goals. I feel like we have no chance, or we have less chance unless we can adopt something more professional like organizational change behavior and change management.
Right. Another question here: where have you seen change management executed exceptionally well outside of obviously the projects you've overseen, Jeff?
Oh, that is a great question. There are some real success stories in GE. GE has their issues in some areas, but they made the black belt change management process training, Six Sigma, a really big push. Several decades, I think, of investment in that. And they have, in some of their business units, outside of the financial results, just looking at an individual business, they've had some fantastic results and success because I think they've sort of made it a prerequisite capability. They look at it as a competitive strength to their success, that they're able to change. I think Amazon might be another great example with obviously more financial results to prove it. I love Jeff Bezos's idea that every day is day one. This idea that we don't have everything figured out, that we might need to change direction. We might need some brand new thing. We might need to shut down some of what we're doing now that just isn't working. And they've done some things that have failed and they've completely closed off, but they clearly have also done some things. AWS is a complete separate business, but one that's leveraged on their core competencies that they built running their core. Just very, very impressive examples.
Great. Another question here, obviously focusing specifically on mid-market. Would it be naive to assume that because the organizations are obviously smaller than large enterprise, that change can be adopted a lot easier? Or would it be viewed that it can actually be even more challenging at times because there's a greater level of risk associated with the change and less budget to be open to, I suppose, failure or mistakes?
That's a very insightful question. I think it points to a couple of the key differences. I think some of the other that can be harder in the mid-market setting is this entrepreneurial kind of culture that we often have as mid-sized companies. In a corporate setting, it becomes part of the air and water that you're part of a larger enterprise, that things are going to happen that are outside of your control and which you need to get on board with, and getting on board may be a key part of your job. I think that becomes kind of a baked in idea for large company employees and even leaders, more so than for mid-sized companies where they are so entrepreneurial and nimble. They're often talking about everything ahead of time. And so it can be harder to get on board if they're not personally supportive. They can feel like, well, I'm kind of an important person around here. I can express my skepticism and dig my heels in on this. And that can be a very negative influence on projects, almost to the point where I've seen really the CEO needs to enforce like a unanimity across the leadership team so that no one takes advantage of their influence in their local group to really dig heels in, because if they do, the change is it's dead on arrival.
Awesome, thank you so much. And less so questions here, but just really some comments of support and agreement from the audience throughout that session. So I just wanted to highlight some of these. So Rick mentioned in his experience, or it is his experience, that if leadership truly buys in, they will go first. When that top-down leadership backs up support and commitment with actions, it helps tremendously. Do you agree with that?
I do. Absolutely. Actions speak louder than words, right? So that's a great sentiment.
Good stuff. Dan said, Jeff, I agree. It's terrible to oversee the benefits. A technique I use is highlighting the trough of disillusionment, and the collective leadership goal should be to minimize the depth and length of time it takes for the change to have a positive impact.
Absolutely.
And then finally, Kevin just said, great point regarding the support team training. The business unit should pay for this as well.
Yeah. Well, it's ultimately it's an investment. Some of these things are looked at sometimes as a cost in a vacuum, and the impact on the business is missed. So that's one that I do feel pretty strongly about. I've seen it both ways, and I believe it's almost always worth the investment.
Brilliant. And final comment here, just coming from John Henthorne. I found that during the pandemic and work from home in general, that his users have actually adapted to change and actually pulled for the change more than ever before. Digitizing manual processes in particular has been a focus, and we're moving faster than ever. So it does seem that although this has posed a lot of issues around change management, it is also opening up some doors. That's
fantastic. Yeah, it's one of the interesting things in the pandemic, the breadth of the spectrum of impact you know, economically as well as psychologically. So that's great to hear that there are organizations out there that you know, they got a boost. Certainly, seeing what technology can do, we all got a boost from that. If people were trying to push for video conferencing and collaboration tools, this pandemic was a fantastic proof of concept that they never could have arranged in a million years. Yeah, you know, I think for those organizations where it's difficult and where people feel more isolated, I think, you know, it's hopefully improving the more we go. I think there's some solutions coming around. There's lots of creative ideas with getting people paired up one-on-one like they would sometimes in the, you know, hallway or the company coffee room, etc. I really like those initiatives for remote workers, because it's the closer we can make it, the more the human element of work, the more that we'll have those benefits come in as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Everyone, please join me in a virtual round of applause. That was a fantastic session, extremely insightful. We thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much to the audience for your contributions via questions and comments as well. So that just about rounds off to the first day of the Mid-Market IT and Security Leaders Virtual Forum. Thank you again, Jeff, and thanks everyone for participating.